Hey, it's Russell Moore. This is Reading in Exile. One of the things that I've been thinking about while we're all sort of voluntarily or maybe involuntarily, depending on where you are, quarantine, is an old Twilight Zone episode, black and white Twilight Zone episode of a man who's in a bunker, his library bunker. It's after a nuclear war, and he's sort of I think it's Burgess Meredith, if I remember right. He's glad to be able to to have all the time to read that he wants, and then he breaks his glasses and he can't see. So there's a sort of apocalyptic vision. I keep thinking about that because we're all sort of in our homes, and a lot of people are reading things that they might not have had time to read before, trying to pass the time away. But also because several of you have asked me about books about the end times. And I think that's because people are thinking about that. They're looking at things on the news that are terrifying to them. And so it's causing people to think a little bit about the end of everything and where the universe is going. And so some people have asked for some recommendations. Now, let me tell you, all I'm doing right now is just sort of going along my shelf, pulling some things off as I think about it. If I were sitting down and writing a syllabus or a list of recommendations, it would be probably a different list. There would be some different things. This is just, let me talk about that. Let me talk about that. So talk about that. Here's some things on the end times that I would pull off of my shelf. And some of those things would be a guy by the name of George Eldon Ladd, who is an evangelical. This is his theology of the New Testament. He was a New Testament prof at Fuller Theological Seminary, and had a huge influence on the way that I read the Bible, on the way that I see the world. And what Ladd did was to take themes already present in Christian theology, from Augustine, from Irenaeus, from Justin, Martyr, and Maximus, Confessor, all the way through the Christian tradition, Gerhardus Voss, about inaugurated eschatology, that the kingdom is present in the incarnation of Jesus and in the sending of the Spirit, and yet the kingdom is future. And so you have to differentiate between what is already and what is not yet. And so he had a huge influence on me. If you had to read one, I'd recommend this little Crucial Questions about the Kingdom of God. Really, really good. I liked this Alistair Mcgrath, History of Heaven. Just sort of looks at how people have viewed heaven throughout history. And I like this little collection of essays from C.S. Lewis. And we'll talk about Lewis, of course, later on. But he has one in here on the world's last night and about the idea of second coming and why the second coming is so important. And so I have marked here, let me just see what I marked because I haven't looked at it in a while. I have marked here, the idea here, which here shuts out the second coming from our minds, the idea that the world slowly ripens to perfection is a myth, not a generalization from experience. And it's a myth which distracts us from our real duties and our real interests. It is our attempt to guess the plot of a drama in which we are the characters. But how can the characters in a play guess the plot? We are not the playwright. We are not the producer. We are not even the audience. We are on the stage. I really like that about you have to have a plot line by which to judge your life and a biblical view of reality, including the climax of it all in the second coming of Christ is necessary. So World's Last Night. This is a good little book, Al Walter's Creation Regained, about the importance of understanding new creation and about how the end of everything, meaning end, meaning goal, is about restoration of what God has created. Michael Horton has written this book, Covenant and Eschatology. Now, this is, a complicated book for people who aren't, theologically or academically oriented. But for those of you who are, I think it's just fantastic. Along the same lines, Anthony Hoekema's The Bible in the Future. Probably if somebody said, just give me one book to sort of explain everything, life after death and the events of the second coming and the new heavens and the new earth, this might be what I would give, probably would be. I like this book by Stan Grins, the late Stan Grins, on the millennial maze, where he's going through the various views of the millennium, amillennialism, premillennialism, postmillennial. What I like about it is that he's not going through and so much arguing Revelation 20, as much as he is saying, here's why people hold these specific views, and here's what you can learn from this viewpoint, even if you don't hold it. I think that really is a brilliant thing. Paul Boyer has this book I assign to my students a lot, When Time Shall Be No More, that really looks at prophecy, the way that people have responded to prophecy in American life. So everything from kind of Hal Lindsey stuff in the 70s to the Left Behind series in the 90s and everything in between. It's a helpful sort of sociological study of that. In terms of just not the end of the universe, but the end of the person, this book by Richard John Newhouse, Death on a Friday Afternoon, is really good. He's talking about, he's sort of looking at the last words of Jesus, the crucifixion, in light of an experience he had where he almost died. It's sort of what he learned about mortality. Really moving and good book. This is several of these, Bodies in Motion and at Rest, and The Undertaking. They're not by, I don't think, a Christian, but it's by an undertaker who's talking about mortality and talking about sort of what he's learned about death and life in terms of being a funeral director. And there's a lot in here that's just really shaped how I think about funerals, about grieving, about shortness of life. I recommend that to you. Also, Studs Terkel. What he used to do, he was sort of a cranky old leftist, kind of a Bernie Sanders of journalism. And what he would do is he would interview people, just let them talk. And this is fascinating because he's talking to people about death, people who are dying, people who have lost someone, just about what they think about death and how they experience it. And you can really learn a lot out of that. And then where did I put them? I've got some novels and poetry on the end of the world, and I left them on the floor. And so I don't know how to get them, but so maybe we'll come back and do another episode on fiction and nonfiction about the end times. But this is, fiction and poetry on the end times. This is nonfiction. And what would you like us to talk about? Whether it's an individual book, if I have it on my shelf, we can talk about it, or sort of like this, a series of recommendations. Let me know in the comments, and we'll be back next time to talk about reading in exile.